I saw it with my own eyes. I had barely stepped through the tall garden doors when my feet stopped moving. The evening air was still warm. Lanterns hung low between the rose hedges, casting gold across the stone path. Laughter drifted from inside the manor, soft and distant. But out here, in the shadowed corner just past the ivy wall, the Duke of Ravensfield stood with his hands cupping the face of another woman. Not just any woman. Lady Fenella Stowe. The most beautiful, most talked about, most boldly ambitious woman in all of London. The one who had smiled at me across every ballroom for 3 seasons and never once meant it. And the Duke, Lord Cassian Ravensfield, the man I had quietly, foolishly, devotedly loved for longer than I would ever admit aloud, was kissing her. I didn't gasp. I didn't drop my fan. I did not press a trembling hand to my chest the way I had seen other women do in moments of shock. I simply stood there for 3 full seconds, watching. Then something inside me went very, very still. I straightened my back. I lifted my chin. And when the soft crunch of gravel beneath my own shoes threatened to betray me, I turned around slowly, calmly, and walked back toward the light. I even smiled, not because I was fine, not because it did not hurt, but because I had learned, long before this night, that a woman who lets the world see her bleeding will always be the one blamed for the wound. I stepped back into the ballroom. The music swelled. Lord Percival Horton immediately crossed the room to offer me champagne. My cousin Daphne caught my eye from across the floor and raised an eyebrow. I shook my head once. Not now. I laughed at something Lord Percival said. I could not even remember what it was. But somewhere behind me, beyond those garden doors, a choice had just been made. And I hadn't been the one to make it. Now tell me, if you were in my place, would you have walked away too? Or would you have made him face you right there and then? Drop your answer in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. And if this story already has your heart, please hit that subscribe button. There is so much more coming, and trust us, you do not want to miss a single moment. The ballroom was full that night. Every chandelier burned bright. Every glass clinked. Every laugh rose and fell like music itself had taken human form and decided to dance. Lord Harwick's annual autumn gathering was the most attended event of the season, and everyone who mattered in London had shown up wearing their finest pride alongside their finest clothes. I was no different. I stood near the east archway, with my cousin Daphne on one side and Lord Percival Horton on the other. Percival was going on about something involving his new horse and a narrow bridge in the countryside. Daphne was pretending to listen. I was doing the same, because across the room, standing beside the tall window with a glass of brandy, and absolutely no awareness that I existed, was Cassian Ravensfield, the Duke of Ravensfield. Or he was speaking to Lord Harwick himself, nodding slowly at something being said, his jaw set in that calm, unreadable way that had made half of London's women lose sleep. He was not the tallest man in the room. He was not the loudest. But there was something about the way he stood, like the room had arranged itself around him without being asked, that made it impossible to look anywhere else for long. I had known Cassian for 4 years. Not closely. Not the way a woman hopes to know the man she cannot stop thinking about. We had exchanged words at dinners, shared brief glances at recitals, been introduced 3 separate times at different gatherings by people who clearly did not remember they had already introduced us. Each time he smiled politely, Each time I had smiled back, and each time I had walked away telling myself it meant nothing, knowing full well that it did. My name is Lady Vivian Callard. My father is the Earl of Dunmore, a respected but quietly struggling title. My mother passed away when I was 11. I was raised by a father who loved books more than society, and an aunt who loved society more than anything else. I had been presented at court, survived 3 seasons, received 2 proposals I had declined for reasons I still stood by, and managed, somehow, to remain unmarried at the age of 23 without causing a full scandal. That last part was considered nearly miraculous by my aunt, Lady Orelyn Callard, who reminded me of it often. Daphne nudged my arm. "He is looking this way." I did not turn immediately. That was the first rule I had taught myself. Never turn immediately. I counted to 4, but then I glanced. Cassian was not looking at me. He was looking past me, toward the entrance, where Lady Fenella Stowe had just arrived in a sweep of perfume and attention. The room noticed her the way rooms always noticed Fenella. A ripple, a pause, then a collective exhale as people pretended they had not been staring. Fenella was 25, recently widowed from a much older baron, and absolutely unbothered by any of it. She had dark hair, sharp eyes, a laugh that carried across any space, and a talent for making every man in her presence feel like the only one in the room. She was not cruel exactly. She was simply magnetic in the way that tends to leave other people feeling slightly invisible. She caught my eye from across the ballroom and smiled, wide, warm, and completely unreadable. I smiled back. Daphne leaned close. "She is headed for the Duke." "She is headed for Lord Harwick," I said. "He is standing right beside the Duke." "Vivian." "Daphne." She gave me a look I knew well, the kind that said she was choosing to let me have my small comfort for now. Fenella greeted Lord Harwick with great charm, and then, without missing a single beat, turned the full warmth of her attention on to Cassian. He straightened almost imperceptibly. His expression shifted from polite to genuinely interested. I watched it happen the way you watch a candle flame lean toward a draught. Inevitable. Quiet. Impossible to stop. Percival was still talking about his horse. I pulled my attention back to him and nodded at something I had not heard. The evening continued. I danced once with Lord Percival and once with young Mr. Alden Foss, on a cheerful second son with no estate, and wonderful conversation. I spoke with Mrs. Georgette Harwick about her children. I complimented Lady Prue Oswald on her embroidery work, displayed near the sitting-room entrance. I did everything right. I was present, pleasant, composed. And then I stepped out for air. The garden doors were open just slightly, enough to let the night in. I slipped through them because the room had grown warm, and my chest had grown tighter than I wanted to admit. The gravel path curved between low rose hedges. Lanterns hung from thin iron hooks above, swaying almost imperceptibly in the faint wind. It was beautiful out here. Quiet. The kind of quiet that reminds you that you are a person with feelings, not just a woman performing composure at a party. I walked slowly, breathing in the cool air, to letting my shoulders drop for the first time all evening. And then I saw them. In the shadowed corner just past the ivy wall, Cassian stood with both hands cradling Fenella's face. Her hands were pressed against his chest, and he was kissing her. Not briefly, not accidentally, deliberately, tenderly, in the way that a man kisses a woman he has been wanting to kiss for some time. I did not make a sound. I stood there for 3 full seconds. I know because I counted without meaning to, the way the mind reaches for something to hold on to when the rest of it goes numb. Then I turned around. I walked back toward the garden doors. My steps were even. My breathing was controlled. I reached the doors, pushed them open, and stepped back into the warmth and noise of the ballroom. I even smiled. Not at anyone in particular. Just smiled. Put the way you do when you need your face to say something your heart refuses to. Percival appeared at my side almost immediately with a fresh glass of champagne. There you are. I was beginning to think the roses had stolen you. The roses were very persuasive, I said. My voice came out perfectly steady. I was almost proud of it. Daphne found me minutes later. She looked at my face for exactly 1 second, and then looked away, and I knew she had seen something in my expression that I had not managed to hide completely. But she said nothing. She simply slipped her arm through mine and began talking about Mrs. Harwick's ridiculous new curtains, and I loved her for it more than I could say. The rest of the evening passed. People laughed. People danced. Lord Cassian Ravensfield returned to the ballroom some time later, with not a single thing out of place about him. He moved through the room with the same calm authority as always. Fenella reappeared on the other side of the space and was immediately surrounded by admirers. Nothing looked different. Nothing looked wrong. Only I knew what I had seen. And I had decided, somewhere between the garden and the champagne, that I was going to do the most dangerous thing a woman in my position could do. I was going to let him think everything was perfectly fine. That night in the carriage home, Daphne finally spoke. What happened in the garden? I looked out the window at the dark streets rolling past. Nothing, I said. I needed air. I got it. She was quiet for a moment. Vivian. I am tired, Daphne. She did not press further, but she reached over in the dark and squeezed my hand once, firmly, and did not let go for the rest of the ride home. I stared at the passing lamplight and thought about his hands on her face. I thought about how gently he had held her. I thought about 3 seasons of polite smiles and careful glances, and the story I had been quietly writing in my head that he had apparently never been part of at all. Then I pressed it all down, deep and flat, the way you press flowers in a book. Preserved, hidden, out of sight. I was Lady Vivian Callard, and I was going to be absolutely fine. I told myself that twice before I fell asleep. I almost believed it. 3 days passed before I saw Cassian again. It was at the Oswald afternoon tea, a small but carefully curated gathering that Lady Prue Oswald hosted every other week with the quiet precision of a military general. The guest list never exceeded 20. The seating was always intentional, and the conversation, while polished on the surface, had the sharpest undercurrents of any room in London. I arrived with Daphne and my aunt, Lady Orelin, who had insisted on attending, despite a mild cough she had been dramatically amplifying for 3 days. Aunt Orelin believed deeply in being seen, even when slightly unwell, especially when slightly unwell. The Oswald sitting room was already half full when we entered. Lady Prue greeted us warmly near the door. Mr. Alden Foss was there, speaking with his elder brother, of the severe and largely humourless Sir Bramwell Foss. Mrs. Georgette Harwick sat near the window with her closest friend, the always observant Mrs. Lettice Crane, who noticed everything and forgot nothing. Lord Percival Horton stood near the fireplace, looking handsome and only mildly bored. And then there was Cassian. He was seated beside Lady Prue's elderly mother, old Mrs. Oswald, listening to her with what appeared to be genuine patience. He had a teacup in one hand. His posture was relaxed. He had not seen me yet. I made sure my face was perfectly pleasant before I moved fully into the room. Aunt Aurelin immediately commandeered Mrs. Crane for a conversation about a mutual acquaintance's recent poor decisions in matrimony. Daphne drifted toward Alden Foss, who brightened considerably upon seeing her, and I found myself guided by Lady Prue toward the small cluster of seats near the centre of the room, which happened to be directly in Cassian's line of sight. He saw me. He nodded once, that same polite, composed acknowledgement he had offered me at every event for 4 years. "Lady Vivian." "Your Grace," I said, with a smile that cost me nothing and gave away even less. He looked at me for just a fraction of a second longer than usual. Then he turned back to old Mrs. Oswald, who had resumed her story about a garden party from 1847. I sat. I accepted tea. I spoke with Lady Prue about a charity recital being planned for the following month. I was charming. I was warm. I was entirely, convincingly unbothered. What I hadn't expected was Fenella. She arrived 40 minutes into the gathering, slightly late in the way that people with absolute confidence in their welcome always are. Lady Prue received her with genuine affection. Fenella kissed both her cheeks, laughed about the traffic near Regent Street, and then swept her gaze across the room, with the ease of someone who has never once worried about how they would be received anywhere. Her eyes landed on Cassian first. A small, private smile crossed her face. Then they landed on me. And something flickered there, something quick and assessing, before her expression settled back into warmth. "Lady Vivian," she said, crossing toward me with her hand extended. "How lovely. I do not think we have spoken properly in ages." "Lady Fenella," I said, taking her hand. "You look very well." "And you look—" She paused, tilting her head slightly, art composed. It was a strange word to choose. I held her gaze and smiled. "How kind." She sat across from me, accepted tea from a passing tray, and began speaking with Lady Prue about the charity recital. But every few minutes I felt her attention return to me, the way you feel a draft from a door that has not been fully closed. Cassian moved through the room. He spoke with Sir Bramwell about something parliamentary. He allowed old Mrs. Oswald to show him a miniature portrait she had brought in her bag for reasons no one questioned. He exchanged a brief word with Lord Percival. He was doing what he always did, being present, composed, effortlessly dignified. And then, quite unexpectedly, he sat down in the empty chair beside me. "You left Lord Harwick's gathering early the other evening," he said. Not an accusation, just an observation. But the fact that he had noticed at all made something shift inside my chest. "I had a slight headache," I said simply. "I hope it has passed." "Completely," I said. "Thank you." He nodded. Then, instead of moving on the way I had expected, he stayed. He picked up his teacup. He asked me what I thought of Lady Prue's new portrait above the mantel. I told him. He disagreed, mildly, pleasantly, and explained why. I pushed back, and he listened, and for about 4 minutes we had a genuine conversation about art and proportion, and what makes a painted face feel alive or empty. It was the longest we had ever spoken directly. It was also, I realized with a slow, horrible clarity, the most natural I had ever felt in his presence. When he finally rose to greet another arriving guest, I kept my expression easy and let my eyes drift toward the window. Outside, the afternoon light was thinning to gold. Daphne was laughing at something Alden Foss had said. Aunt Aurelin was still deeply engaged with Mrs. Crane, The room hummed pleasantly around me, and Fenella was watching me with an expression I could not quite name. Not hostility, not guilt. Something more careful than both. Later, as the gathering thinned and coats were being called for, Fenella appeared at my side near the entrance hall. She lowered her voice just slightly. He speaks to very few people the way he just spoke to you. I looked at her. I beg your pardon? She smiled, and it was different from her usual ones. Smaller, more honest. Cassian. He is careful with people. He does not often linger. She paused. Yes, but he lingered with you. I did not know what she was telling me. I did not know if it was a kindness or a provocation or something else entirely. So I simply said, "How observant of you," and put on my coat. In the carriage, Aunt Orelin talked about Mrs. Crane's eldest daughter's recent poor choice of hat. Daphne sat quietly with a small smile that told me she was thinking about Alden Foss. I sat with my hands in my lap and turned Fenella's words over like a coin I didn't know the value of. He lingered with you. Why would she say that? She had kissed him in Lord Harwick's garden 3 nights ago. She had stood with his hands on her face and let him. And now she was offering me observations about his behavior as though she were helping me. None of it made sense. And the things that do not make sense are always the ones that keep you awake. That night, a letter arrived. It was brought to my room by our housemaid Betsy, who looked faintly curious about it, the way only Betsy could manage. The envelope was plain. The handwriting was precise and unfamiliar. I turned it over twice before opening it. Inside was a single line. "You saw. I know you did. We should speak. Tell no one. F." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it very carefully, tucked it into the pages of the book on my nightstand, and lay back against my pillow staring at the ceiling. F. Fenella. She had written to me. Privately. Urgently. Warning me to tell no one. She knew I had been in the garden. She had seen me, or sensed me, or somehow known. And instead of ignoring it, instead of pretending it had never happened, or she had reached out. Why? What did Fenella Stowe need to explain to me badly enough to write a secret letter the same week she had been kissed by the man I had spent 4 years, quietly, painfully, devotedly wanting? I did not sleep for a very long time. When I finally did, I dreamed of the garden, the lanterns, the gravel, the corner past the ivy wall, and in my dream, I did not walk away. I met Fenella on Thursday. She had suggested a small bookshop on a quiet street near Covent Garden, the kind of place that smelled of old paper and candle wax, and was frequented by people who did not want to be seen having conversations they did not want repeated. I arrived first, which was intentional. I wanted to be the one already standing when she walked in. I wanted that small advantage. The shop was narrow and warm. The owner, a round-faced older man named Mr. Tully, barely glanced up from his ledger when I entered. 2 other customers moved quietly between the shelves. I positioned myself near the back, between a wall of leather-bound histories and a small table stacked with recently arrived novels. Fenella arrived 7 minutes later. She was dressed simply for once. No jewels, no dramatic entrance. She spotted me immediately and came directly over without pausing to greet anyone or arrange her expression. That alone told me this was serious. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "Your letter made it difficult to consider anything else," I replied. She glanced once toward Mr. Tully, who was still absorbed in his ledger, and then looked back at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something stripped back. something almost frightened. "What I'm about to tell you," she said, "you must promise to hold carefully." "I promise nothing until I know what I am holding," I said. She looked at me for a moment, then nodded, as though that answer had actually reassured her more than a quick agreement would have. "Fair," she said. "All right." She drew a slow breath. "Cassian and I are not what you think we are." I kept my face still. "What I think is none of your concern." "It is, actually," she said, "because what you believe you saw in that garden could ruin him, and I will not allow that." The directness of it surprised me, not the content, the fierceness. She was not performing. She was not managing me. She was protecting him, and the honesty of it landed somewhere uncomfortably close to my ribs. "Explain," I said. Fenella looked down briefly at the books on the table between us, then backed up. "My late husband, Baron Stowe, left considerable debts. Not publicly known debts, private ones, owed to men who do not operate within any polite understanding of the law. When he died, those debts did not die with him. They transferred to me." She paused. "One of those men has been pressuring me for months. He wants something beyond money. He has been watching me, sending messages, having people follow my movements. He wants information about certain members of Parliament, and he believes my social connections give me access to it." I stared at her. "And Cassian?" "Cassian found out 3 weeks ago. Not from me, from his own sources." She pressed her lips together briefly. "He came to me privately and offered to help. What you saw in that garden was not a love affair. It was a performance. Deliberate, calculated, and necessary." Her voice dropped further. "We needed anyone watching me to believe I was romantically occupied, emotionally distracted, that I was not a threat or an asset anymore. If this man believes I am simply a woman caught up in a new attachment, he will stop watching so closely, and Cassian's people will have time to move." The silence between us was dense and full. I looked at her face carefully. Every line of it. Searching for the performance, for the angle, for the thing she might be hiding inside the thing she was revealing. Because I was not naive, women like Fenella did not become untouchable in London society without knowing exactly how to construct a convincing story. But her hands were not entirely steady. "Why tell me?" I asked. "Because you saw," she said, "and I watched your face in that sitting room 3 days later. You are not the kind of woman who crumbles, but you are also not the kind of woman who simply forgets. You are going to do something with what you saw, even if that something is only silence. And silence in the wrong direction. What can be just as destructive as words." I thought about the letter tucked inside my book at home, the single line, "Tell no one." "If what you are saying is true," I said slowly, "then Cassian is involving himself in something genuinely dangerous." "Yes," she said simply, "and he did not think to inform anyone who might be affected by the performance, anyone who might have seen and misunderstood." Something shifted in her expression. Careful. Watching me. "He does not know you saw." That sat between us like a stone dropped into still water. He did not know. He had stood in that garden with his hands on her face, and he had no idea I had been standing on the gravel path 3 feet away, with my world rearranging itself quietly around me. I breathed in slowly, then out. "What do you need from me?" Fenella blinked. I think she had been prepared for more resistance. "Nothing dangerous," she said. "I only need you to continue behaving exactly as you have been. Composed, unbothered. Do not pull away from society. Do not avoid him. Do not give anyone watching a reason to wonder what you know. And if someone asks me directly about the Duke? You think he is perfectly agreeable and utterly unremarkable, she said, and something in her eyes said she meant the opposite, and knew I knew it too. Can you do that? I thought about 3 seconds in a garden, about a folded letter, about 4 years of careful, quiet wanting that had apparently been conducted entirely alone. Yes, I said, I can do that. We stood for a moment longer in the dusty warmth of Mr. Tully's bookshop. Then Fenella straightened, and just for a breath, she reached out and touched my hand, not dramatically, just a brief, firm press of her fingers. He is not indifferent to you, she said quietly, whatever else you may have concluded. I want you to know that. She left before I could respond. I stood between the leather-bound histories and the stack of new novels and stared at the place where she had been standing. Mr. Tully turned a page in his ledger. One of the other customers sneezed somewhere among the shelves. I picked up a book I had no intention of buying and held it without reading a single word. He is not indifferent to you. Of all the things she could have left me with, she had chosen that. And the cruelest part was that I could not decide whether it made everything better or unbearably worse. I bought the book I had not read. I walked home through the thinning afternoon. I nodded to our neighbour Mrs. Farrow, who was arguing softly with her gardener near the front gate. I went inside. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall for a long time. Then I heard Daphne's voice from the hallway. "Vivian, you have a caller." I straightened. "Who?" A pause. Then, carefully, "The Duke of Ravensfield." I closed my eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then I stood up, smoothed my skirt, arranged my face into something pleasant and unrevealing, and walked toward the door. He was standing in the front sitting room when I came downstairs, not seated, standing near the window, with his hat in one hand and a posture that suggested he had not been entirely certain this was a good idea, and had come anyway. That detail alone made something pull tight inside my chest. Daphne was hovering near the doorway with the specific expression of someone who very much wanted to leave, but also very much wanted to stay. I gave her a single look. She withdrew, though I had no doubt she positioned herself somewhere just close enough to hear the general tone of whatever happened next. "Your Grace," I said, moving into the room with a composure I had spent the last hour unknowingly preparing for. "This is unexpected. Forgive the intrusion," he said. "I will not take much of your time. Please sit." He hesitated, then sat. I took the chair across from him, not the one beside him, and folded my hands in my lap. He looked at me with those steady, unreadable eyes, and for a moment he did not speak. Just looked, as though he was trying to determine something. Then he said, "I owe you an explanation." Every careful thing inside me went alert. I kept my expression easy. "I cannot imagine for what." "Lord Harwick's garden," he said. The room felt suddenly smaller. I held his gaze without flinching. "I beg your pardon?" "You were there," he said. "I saw you. Not immediately. But I saw you as you were leaving." He paused. "I saw your face." The floor felt slightly less solid than it had a moment ago. He had seen me. He had watched me walk away. He had seen the 3 seconds, the straightened back, the smile I had put on like armor, and he had said nothing for 5 days. "You saw me," I repeated, because I needed to say something while my mind caught up. "I should have come sooner," he said. I tried to think of the right way to approach this, and I spent too long thinking. I looked at him, the hat in his hands, the set of his jaw, the fact that he was here, in my sitting room, uninvited, with no social occasion to use as cover. This was not polished Cassian Ravensfield moving through a ballroom. This was something else. "And have you found the right way?" I asked. "No," he said honestly. But I could not let more time pass. I considered my next words very carefully. Fenella had told me this morning that he did not know I had seen. And yet here he was, telling me he had seen me seeing. One of them had lied, or one of them had been mistaken, or something else entirely was happening that I did not yet have enough pieces to understand. "What is it you want to explain?" I asked carefully. He leaned forward slightly. What happened in that garden was not what it appeared to be. I allowed a small, polite confusion to cross my face. I confess I did not look closely enough to form any strong impression. He studied me. "You are very composed. I am an earl's daughter who has survived 3 London seasons," I said. "Composure is simply a matter of practice." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Something quieter. "Lady Vivian, Your Grace, I'm going to ask you something directly," he said, and I would be very grateful for a direct answer. My heart was doing something completely undignified behind my ribs. "What, ask? Do you trust me?" Of all the questions I had been preparing for, that was not among them. I stared at him. He held my gaze with a steadiness that felt almost like a hand extended across a very wide space. "Do you trust me? Not please believe me. Not let me explain. Do you trust me?" As though whatever came next depended not on the facts of the situation, but on something far more fundamental between us. "I do not know you well enough to trust you," I said, "but I have never had reason to distrust you." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, slowly, as though that answer had given him something to work with. "There is something happening," he said carefully, choosing each word, "that I cannot fully explain. Not because I wish to deceive you, because there are people who could be hurt if the wrong information reached the wrong ears. But I want you to know that nothing I have done was careless, and nothing I have done was meant to cause you any pain." The last 4 words were said differently from the rest. Quieter, deliberate. He was watching my face when he said them, and I had to work very hard to make sure my face gave him nothing he had not already earned. "You assume that I was pained?" I said lightly. "I assume nothing," he said. "I only know what I saw." That sat between us, heavy, warm, dangerous. I was suddenly very aware of how quiet the room was, of the distance between our chairs, of the fact that Daphne was definitely pressed against the hallway wall on the other side of the door. "What is it you want from me?" I asked. And I meant it practically, of the way Fenella had meant it when I asked her. I wanted to know what role I was being cast in, what was expected, what the shape of this was. But he answered differently than Fenella had. "Nothing," he said. "I want nothing from you. I came because I didn't want you to have a wrong impression of who I am. Not because it serves any strategy. Simply because it matters to me what you think." I looked at him for a long, still moment. He was not performing. I had watched him perform in ballrooms for 4 years. I knew the version of Cassian Ravensfield that was built for public consumption. This was not it. This was something with the protective surface removed, and it was, I realized with a slow, sinking certainty, far more dangerous to me than any version I had encountered before. "Then you may consider your impression corrected," I said quietly. He held my gaze for a moment longer. Then he stood, straightened, and put his hat back in proper position. "Thank you for receiving me." Thank you for coming." He moved toward the door. Then he stopped, half-turned, and said without quite looking at me, "The recital next Friday. Lady Prue's charity event. Will you be attending?" "I believe so," I said. He nodded. "Good." And then he was gone. I stayed in my chair. I listened to the sound of the front door closing. I listened to the carriage wheels on the street outside pulling away. I listened to the complete and total silence that followed. Then Daphne appeared in the doorway with wide eyes and no pretense whatsoever. "Vivian, what was that?" "A social call," I said. "That was not a social call," she said, as entering the room fully and dropping into the chair he had just vacated. "That was a man who came here specifically to make sure you did not think badly of him. That is entirely different from a social call." I looked at my hands in my lap. "Do not make it into something it is not." "I am not making anything," she said. "I am simply observing that the Duke of Ravensfield, who could have sent a card or said nothing at all, got into a carriage and came here. To you. Personally." I stood up and moved to the window. Outside, the street was ordinary. A woman walking a small dog. 2 boys arguing about something near the corner post. A perfectly regular afternoon. "He is involved in something," I said quietly. "Something that involves Fenella Stowe, and men I suspect are not the kind you invite to dinner." Daphne's tone shifted immediately. "But how do you know that?" "Fenella told me." Silence. Then, "When?" "This morning, at a bookshop near Covent Garden." More silence, the kind that meant Daphne was rearranging everything she thought she knew about last week. "Vivian," she said at last, very carefully, "are you in the middle of something dangerous?" I thought about Cassian's voice. "Nothing I have done was meant to cause you any pain." I thought about Fenella's unsteady hands. I thought about a letter tucked inside a book on my nightstand. "Not yet," I said. But even as I said it, I heard how thin the word was, how much weight it was being asked to carry. Because somewhere between a garden I should never have walked into, and a sitting-room visit I had never been prepared for, as I had stopped being a woman on the outside of something and become a woman standing right at the edge of it. And the most alarming part was not the danger. It was that, standing at that edge, I felt more alive than I had in years. The night of Lady Prue's charity recital arrived with a cold wind and a sky full of low clouds that threatened rain, but never quite delivered it. I dressed carefully. Not because I was trying to impress anyone. I told myself that firmly at least 4 times while Betsy arranged my hair. I simply wanted to feel anchored, steady, like myself. Because the version of myself that had been moving through the last week felt slightly unfamiliar, like a coat that fit well, but had been recently altered in ways I had not yet fully mapped. Daphne knocked on my door just before we left. She looked at my face the way she had been looking at it all week, checking for cracks she was too kind to point out directly. "You look well," she said. "I feel well," I said. She nodded, unconvinced, and said nothing further, till the recital was held at Lady Prue's townhouse, a wider, warmer space than her sitting room, with chairs arranged in neat rows, facing a low platform where a young pianist and a soprano were preparing to perform. The room filled quickly. Mrs. Georgette Harwick arrived with her husband. Mr. Alden Foss came with Sir Bramwell, who looked as though he would rather be anywhere else, but had been socially outmaneuvered. Mrs. Lettice Crane settled herself into a prime observation seat near the middle aisle, with the focused energy of a woman who came to recitals primarily for the conversations that happened around them. Lord Percival Horton appeared late, kissed Lady Prue's hand apologetically and found a seat near the back. Fenella arrived just ahead of me. She was with a woman I didn't recognize, tall and sharp-featured, with the quiet watchfulness of someone accustomed to assessing rooms for exits. Fenella introduced her briefly as Mrs. Aldine Marsh, a friend from her time in Bath. Mrs. Marsh smiled at me with a pleasantness that did not entirely reach her eyes, and I filed that detail away without comment. Cassian arrived last. He came in just as the pianist was settling onto the bench, which meant the room was already quieting, which meant every head turned slightly when the door opened. He offered a brief, composed apology to Lady Prue, and took the only remaining seat, which happened to be in the second row, directly beside me. He had not arranged it. I was almost certain of that. The arrangement was Lady Prue's doing, because Lady Prue noticed everything and apparently had opinions about it. He sat. He glanced at me. "Well, Lady Vivian." "Your Grace," I said softly, because the music was beginning. And then we sat in the near dark, side by side, while the soprano began to sing. I will not pretend that I heard much of the first piece. I was too aware of him beside me, the warmth of his presence, the way he was entirely still, the kind of stillness that belongs to people who have trained themselves not to fidget in public, but who are not actually as calm as they appear. I could feel, in some way I could not logically justify, that he was equally aware of me. Between the first and second pieces, while the room shifted and people leaned to whisper to their neighbors, he said quietly, without turning his head, "I am glad you came." I said I would, I replied, equally quiet. "People say many things," he said. "You tend to mean them." I looked at him then. He was still facing forward, but there was a slight tension along his jaw that told me the words had cost him something small. "How long have you been watching me carefully enough to know that?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, almost inaudibly, "Longer than is entirely reasonable." The second piece began before I could respond, and I was not at all certain what I would have said. I faced forward. The soprano's voice rose and filled the room, clear and aching, and entirely too well suited to the moment. I kept my hand still in my lap. I breathed carefully. I told myself that a man saying something quietly in the dark of a recital was not a declaration. It was a sentence. It was just a sentence, but it sat inside me like a lit match in a very dry room. At the interval, the room broke into conversation and movement. Orfanella appeared at my side almost immediately, and there was something different in her manner, something tighter, more urgent beneath the social surface. She touched my elbow lightly. "I need a moment." We moved toward the far end of the room, near the draped window. Cassian had been pulled into conversation by Sir Bramwell and Lord Percival. Mrs. Marsh was watching us from across the room with those calm, assessing eyes. "Something has changed," Fenella said under her breath. "The man I told you about, the one from my husband's debts. His name is Dorian Fetch. He sent a message this afternoon." I went still. "What kind of message?" "The kind that means he is no longer satisfied with patience," she said. "He knows that Cassian has been involved. Someone told him, or he worked it out. And now he is threatening to make the situation public in a way that would damage Cassian's position considerably." She pressed her lips together. "There is a document, a letter my husband wrote years ago, that implicates a senior member of Parliament in a financial arrangement that was not entirely legal. Fetch has been using that letter as leverage over me, threatening to surface it, and attach Cassian's name to the cover-up if I do not cooperate. But Cassian has nothing to do with the original letter, I said. No, she said, but he has been meeting with me privately, and in the wrong hands, that association can be shaped into whatever story serves the purpose. She glanced quickly toward where Cassian stood. He does not know about this afternoon's message yet. I only just received it before coming here. Then you need to tell him, I said. I will, she said, but Fetch has also mentioned you. Everything in me went absolutely quiet. I beg your pardon? He has been watching me more closely than I realized, she said, and for the first time genuine distress broke through her composure. He has people at these events. Someone saw us together at the bookshop. He does not know what was said, but he knows we met privately, and he knows you are connected socially to Cassian. He will use you as pressure if he thinks it will work. I looked across the room at Cassian. He was laughing at something Lord Percival had said. Easy, warm, entirely unaware. And here, 10 feet away, his world was being quietly surrounded. What does Fetch want? I asked. He wants the parliamentary letter back, she said. Of the original. He gave it to my husband for safekeeping years ago, and it was never returned. He believes I have it. Do you? She met my eyes. Yes. The interval was ending. People were returning to their seats. Lady Prue was gesturing gently toward the platform where the pianist was resettling. Where is it? I asked quickly. Somewhere he will never think to look, she said, because I did not keep it at my house. I knew that would be the first place. She paused. I gave it to someone neutral, someone with no visible connection to any of this. A terrible, dawning understanding began to move through me. Fenella, I am sorry, she said, and she genuinely meant it. I needed somewhere safe, and I needed it quickly, and you were the only person I was certain Fetch had no file on. Not yet. Her voice dropped to nearly nothing. It is in the book I gave you last Tuesday, the one delivered to your house by messenger. Inside the back cover. I stared at her. She had put it inside a book and sent it to my house. Without telling me. Without my agreement. She had made me part of this without my knowledge, and now a dangerous man knew my face. I know, she said, reading every thought crossing my face. I know, and I am asking you not to hate me until this is over. The music resumed. We returned to our seats. Cassian glanced at me as I sat down, and whatever he saw in my expression made his own sharpen slightly. He leaned the smallest degree towards me. Are you all right? Perfectly, I said. He did not believe me. I could feel it in the way he stayed alert beside me for the rest of the recital. No longer entirely still, his attention split between the music and something he could sense, but not yet name. When the final piece ended, and the room broke into applause, he turned to me fully. Something happened during the interval. The soprano was exceptional, I said. Vivian. My name, not my title. Quiet and direct, and so unexpectedly unguarded that it nearly undid me. I looked at him. In his eyes was something I hadn't seen there before. Not polished concern. Not social management. Something raw and focused and completely unconcerned with how it appeared. I made a decision in that instant. Not because I was brave, because I was already inside this, whether I had chosen it or not, and the only thing worse than being in it would be being in it alone. I need to speak with you, I said. Privately. Tonight. He held my gaze for 1 second, then he nodded. My carriage. I will arrange it. I stood. I smiled at Lady Prue. I thanked the soprano. I moved through the room like a woman who had attended a lovely recital and was simply preparing to go home. And somewhere in that room, in the crowd of familiar faces and warm candlelight, at least one pair of eyes was watching me that did not belong to a friend. The carriage was waiting on the side street when I slipped out through Lady Prue's garden entrance with Daphne's hand gripping mine. "I do not like this," Daphne said in a fierce whisper. "You do not have to like it," I said. "I need you to go home in our carriage and tell Aunt Aurelin I had a slight headache and retired early with Mrs. Harwick's company. Can you do that?" "I can do that and simultaneously not like it," she said. "Perfect," I said, and squeezed her hand once before letting go. Cassian's carriage was unmarked, the curtains drawn. His footman opened the door without a word, and I climbed in. Cassian was already inside. He had his forearms on his knees and was leaning forward, waiting. The carriage moved as soon as I was seated. "Tell me," he said immediately. No preamble, so I told him. All of it. Fenella's letter. Or the bookshop, Dorian Fetch, the parliamentary document, the book delivered to my house with something hidden inside its cover that I had been carrying unknowingly for 6 days. I told him clearly and without drama, because drama would have wasted time we may not have had. He listened without interrupting. His expression moved through several things I watched carefully. Controlled alarm, sharp anger, brief and then compressed. Something that looked very much like guilt. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The book is still at your house?" "In my room," I said. "On the nightstand, where I have been sleeping 6 inches from a document that apparently endangers several people." "I am sorry," he said, and it was not a polished apology. It came out roughly, like something pulled from somewhere real. "Well, you should never have been touched by any of this." "No," I agreed. "I should not have." He looked at me steadily. "Are you angry?" I considered the question honestly. "I am something," I said. "I have not finished deciding what." Something that was almost a smile moved across his face and then disappeared. "We need to retrieve that document tonight, before Fetch's people decide to look for it." "Then we should not be driving away from my house," I said. He knocked twice on the carriage roof, a shift in direction. We turned. "Fetch is not an amateur," Cassian said. "He has been operating in the margins of polite society for 15 years, using debt and documents and leverage. He has never used direct violence because he has never needed to. He prefers pressure." He paused. "But he is running out of patience, which means he is running out of caution." "Fenella said someone at the recital was watching," I said. "I know." His jaw tightened. "I identified 2 people when we arrived who had no legitimate reason to be there. I was going to speak to Fenella at the interval, but you reached her first." I looked at him. "You knew tonight would be the pressure point." "I suspected," he said. "Fetch sent a message to me as well this afternoon. He wanted me to understand that he was aware of my involvement and that I had until tomorrow morning to withdraw from Fenella's situation entirely. If I did not, he would surface the parliamentary letter with my name attached and destroy the work of 2 years in one morning." The carriage felt very small suddenly. "And you came to the recital anyway?" "Of course I did," he said simply. The running would have told him everything he needed to know about what I was protecting. I looked at his face in the dim moving light of the carriage. There were things written there that I was only beginning to have the vocabulary for. Steadiness, resolve, and underneath both of those, something quieter and more complicated that had been present in every interaction we had ever had. and that I had never let myself look at directly before tonight. You said at my house that nothing you had done was meant to cause me pain, I said. I would like to know why my pain was something you were thinking about at all. He held my gaze for a long moment. Because I have been thinking about you for considerably longer than is easily explained, he said, and because I handled this badly. I should have told you what was happening before you stumbled into the middle of it. I made a calculation that keeping you uninvolved would keep you safe, and I was wrong. You made a calculation, I repeated. A poor one, he said. Made by a man who was trying to protect someone he does not have the right to protect yet. Yet. That word again. Small and enormous simultaneously. I felt it land somewhere in the center of my chest and stay there. The carriage stopped. We were outside my house. The street was quiet, the lamps burning low. No unusual shadows, no waiting figures that I could see. Cassian looked out the window with a practiced, sweeping assessment that reminded me this man was not only a duke at dinner parties. There were dimensions to him I was only now understanding. I will come in with you, he said. But that will cause talk, I said. It is nearly 11 at night, he said. Talk is already inevitable. He was right. I got out first. He followed. Our housemaid Betsy opened the door before we reached it, which meant she had heard the carriage, and her eyes went very wide at the sight of the Duke of Ravensfield on the front step at this hour. I gave her a look that communicated several things rapidly, and she snapped into professional composure with impressive speed. We went inside. I led him upstairs without stopping to explain anything to Betsy, who I trusted completely, and who I would explain everything to tomorrow. The house was quiet. Aunt Aureline had retired early as she usually did. The hallway was dim and warm. I opened my bedroom door, crossed to the nightstand, and picked up the book. It was the novel I had bought at Mr. Martully's shop, the one I had carried home without reading. I opened the back cover. There, tucked against the inside binding, was a folded paper. Thin, aged slightly at the edges, sealed once with wax that had been carefully broken. I held it out to Cassian without unfolding it. I do not want to read it. You should not, he said, taking it from me carefully. He looked at it for a moment, then folded it again and placed it inside his coat. We stood in my bedroom at 11 at night, with a dangerous document between us, and an entire unspoken conversation filling the air. What happens now? I asked. I take this to the man in my network who has been building a case against Fetch for the better part of a year, he said. With this letter, his leverage disappears. He cannot threaten Fenella, he cannot threaten the parliamentary connection, and he cannot threaten you. He paused. It will take a few days. Until it is resolved, I need you to behave as though nothing unusual has occurred. I have been doing that for 2 weeks, I said. I know, he said. You are remarkably good at it. Composure is a matter of practice, I said, echoing my own words back to myself with a slight edge of irony. He stepped toward me then. Not dramatically, not sweepingly. Just one step, closing the distance between us from politely safe to something else entirely. He looked at me with that unguarded expression I had first seen in my sitting room, and that I was beginning to understand was the real version of him, the one that existed beneath the Duke. When this is over, he said quietly, what I would like to call on you properly. My heart was doing something completely beyond my control behind my ribs. Properly, I repeated. With your father's knowledge, he said. In daylight, with flowers if you will allow it, and without any documents or dangerous men as context. I looked at him for a long moment, at the careful honesty in his face, at the man who had come to my house to apologize when he did not have to, who had sat beside me in the dark and said things that cost him something, who had gotten into a carriage tonight not knowing how much I knew or how I felt and had told me the truth anyway. 4 years. 4 years of polite nods and careful distances, and a story I had been writing alone. "I will allow the flowers," I said. Something in him was released, quietly, completely, like a breath held for a long time. But he did not reach for me. He did not push past the moment. He simply nodded, the way a man nods when he has been given something he was not entirely certain he deserved. "Good night, Lady Vivian," he said. "Good night, Your Grace," I said. He left. I heard his steps on the stairs, the low exchange with Betsy at the door, the sound of the front door closing, and then the carriage wheels pulling away into the quiet street. I stood in my room for a long time without moving. Then, 3 days later, it ended. Cassian's contact, a precise and relentless man named Mr. Silas Corbett, who worked in a governmental capacity that was never fully explained to me, presented Dorian Fetch with a collection of evidence that made the parliamentary letter irrelevant. Fetch's own dealings, recorded and documented over years, were considerably more damaging than anything he had been holding over other people. He withdrew, quietly, immediately, completely. By the following Tuesday he had left London entirely, and the particular shadow that had been stretching over Fenella's life for the better part of a year simply lifted. Fenella came to my house the morning after. She sat across from me in the same sitting room where Cassian had sat, and she looked lighter than I had ever seen her. Not happy exactly, relieved in the deep, exhausted way that follows a very long tension finally breaking. "It is done," she said. "It is done," I agreed. She looked at me with those sharp, honest eyes. "I owe you considerably more than an apology." "You owe me the truth about one thing," I said. She waited. "That night in the garden," I said. "The kiss. Was any part of it real?" She held my gaze for a moment. Then she said, "For me, it was a performance. Clean and purposeful." She paused. For him, I think there was a moment, just a moment, where he pulled back, where something stopped him from being entirely present in it. She tilted her head slightly. I thought it was a caution. Now I think it was something else. I looked at my hands. "You did not have to tell me that." "No," she said, "but I wanted to." She left shortly after. And 2 hours later, Betsy brought up a card on a small silver tray. I looked at it. Then I looked out the window at the late morning light falling across the street below. Lord Percival Horton was passing with his ridiculous new horse. Mrs. Farrow's gardener was winning whatever argument they had been having for weeks, and 2 children were chasing something small and fast along the opposite pavement. An ordinary morning in London. Except that the card in my hand was from Cassian, and on the back, in that precise, careful handwriting, he had written 4 words. The flowers. Tomorrow morning. I turned the card over twice in my fingers. I thought about a garden I had walked into by accident, a smile I had put on like armor. 3 seconds of standing very still while the world rearranged itself around me. I thought about how I had walked away that night, believing it was the end of something. I had not known then that walking away was the beginning. I set the card down on the table and looked at it for a long, quiet moment. Then I went to find Betsy and asked her to send a reply. Yes. Tomorrow morning. And I smiled, genuinely this time, not for the ballroom, not for composure, not for anyone watching. Just for myself, in the ordinary light of an ordinary morning, in the life I had not yet finished writing. Outside, the clouds finally broke. Pale gold light fell through the window and landed warm across the floor. I stood in it and let it. Now, before we close this story, I have one question for you. Vivienne walked away from that garden without a single word, and in the end, that quiet strength brought everything she deserved right to her door. So tell me honestly, do you think walking away with dignity is sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do? Or should she always speak up in the moment? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We genuinely want to know what you think. And if this story moved you the way we hoped it would, please hit that subscribe button right now, because there are more stories coming, and every single one of them is worth staying for.